Hey everyone, Andrew here, and it's time for my top 10 films of the 2010s. I kind of flip-flopped a bit on what I was going to do with this. I originally started out I was going to do the top 5 and have a lot of honorable mentions, but I kind of didn't like where that was going. There was like stuff I really wanted to talk about that I didn't get to. I almost did like the top 10 most underrated films of the 2010s, but I ended up choosing not to do that. And then I was like, okay, I could go by decade, choose my favorite one from each of the years, but I felt that was still a little too limited and a little too this, that, and the other, so I decided I wanted to do it by genre. So I have 10 genres that I picked out. I'll be doing one list that's the top 10 worst and one list that's the top 10 best. I'll go by genre, talking about the ones that I considered for the victory, and then the one I considered overall. I will be doing this as fast-paced as I can, with basically going to keep everything down to maybe just a handful of sentences on anything, to try to save us some time and not have this be an hour-long video. So, you know me, I like to start out with the negative, so let's go with the top 10 worst films of the 2010s by genre. So, for start out, we're going to start out with action. And we've had some bad ones over the last few years. I mean, there was The Lone Ranger, which had some interesting ideas but was really badly put together. You had Cop Out, which I should love because it's Kevin Smith, but it's not funny or even that good action-wise. We had a remake of The Three Musketeers that was very steampunk and had an airship battle that made no freaking sense. And movies like Gangster Squad, which are just as boring as hell. But for me, there was one movie that was a action movie that just horribly depressed me and made me very unhappy and just did not live up to what it deserved to be. And that was A Good Day to Die Hard. Now, I love the Die Hard series. Like, every single one of the movies of the first four is really good to me. Like, Die Hard 1 is one of the best movies ever. Die Hard 2's okay, got its moments. Die Hard 3 is amazing. And Die Hard 4 is fine. It's got some flaws, but at least it feels like a Die Hard movie. A Good Day to Die Hard does not have good use of these characters. In fact, I don't even feel like it has the right characters. Bruce Willis is not playing John McClane in this. He has none of John McClane's thought process. He has none of the human qualities that he brought to John McClane in any of the other movies. In this, he is just straight generic action star who's just going to do insane things without thinking about it, even though in any of the other movies he would take a second and go, this is crazy, okay, I'm doing this. In this one, he's like, nope, I'm just going to drive off a bridge and drive over these other cars for no reason. Plus, the story's horrible, the acting is horrible. Jai Courtney is one of his most annoying roles ever. The plot is all over the place. The twists don't work. The action scenes are boring or ugly or just not fitting with the tone of the genre. Just overall a horrible film. This one is on this because not because it's the worst altogether film, but because it came from such greatness only to be so bad that it killed the franchise. Next, I'm going to go on to comedy. Now, comedies for me are always a little different than other people. There's a lot of comedies people love that I cannot stand. So that would be movies like Neighbors, which I hated because the main characters were annoying and horrible parents, and The Heat. I also really hated Gulliver's Travels. And then, like, anytime Katherine Heigl tried to be funny, especially in Killers, was one of the ones that stood out for me. But if I was going to say anything was the worst comedy movie of the 2010s, I would have to say every single one of the spoof movies. We had a bunch, not as much as we've had in previous years, but they were all atrocious. You had, like, The Hungover Games, Vampires Suck, Haunted House 1 and 2, 50 Shades of Black. Just every single one of these were unfunny, uninteresting, and unnecessary. And none of them even did what they were supposed to do, which was, like, take a genre or take a thing and give a really good spoof on it. We have better spoofs by movies that are actually just trying to do legit versions of it with some comedy. Like, Deadpool is a better spoof than the superhero movie, which I know did not come out in the 2010s, but you get my meaning. Like, we haven't had a good spoof movie since, I would say, Scary Movie 3. And even that one's not great. So, yeah, I'm just including every single one of the spoof movies. They just make us all dumber and just really bad representation of the 2010s. Moving on to drama. Dramas don't always work for me because they tend to be a little bit sadder, a little bit slower, just like and they have to have a certain level of rewatchability for me to really like it. So we had a lot of boring dramas. I just watched Tolkien from last year, which was so boring. I turned it off after 20 minutes because I did not care. Um, By the Sea with Angelina and Brad Pitt was super dry and boring. The Rules Don't Apply, which was Warren Beatty's big comeback movie, was super annoying. You had Boyhood, which was a good concept of watching this kid grow up for 12 years, but there was no plot, no drama, no real story. And then you got things like Billy Lynn's Halftime Walk, which they try to add this dramatic element to it, and it's just so slow and boring. That said, my wish drama of the 2010s was Table 19. Yeah, Table 19 was my worst film for 2017, retroactively, because I didn't see it in 2017. I saw it in 2018, but it's supposed to be a dramedy, but none of the comedy worked. But the drama is even worse, because you have a woman dying of cancer, and I don't care in any way, shape, or form. The main girl has had her boyfriend break up with her while she's pregnant with his child, and then starts flirting with a new guy who turns out to be getting married in the next room. And I do not care. None of that works. None of it is interesting. It's really boring. And when you get to the very end of it and you see what she chooses and what she ends up with, I'm like, no! Why did you make these choices? This is the guy that dumped you. Why are you with him? Type of thing. It's just really bad and uninteresting. I added a couple minor categories that I felt needed to stand on their own, and one of those was musicals. And we had some very bad musicals this couple of years. Now, there's been a lot of musicals over the couple of years. There's a couple of some really bad ones. We had the remake of Annie, which just did Annie but with black characters and bad singing. You had The Jersey Boy, which was directed by Clint Eastwood, doing his first musical, and he drained out every single inch of color from that film, so it's just a gray mess. There's a weird one called Bang Bang Baby, which is about the 1960s and zombies. And they have one guy who does all the singing, and he's supposed to be the big rock star, and he's clearly dubbed. Like, it's so ridiculously not his voice that it's kind of hilarious. We had the remake to Footloose, which was completely pointless. It was the exact same movie, just set with modern-day music. We had Burlesque with Cher and Christina Aguilera, which was just boring and trying so hard to be Chicago, but not succeeding. And one I personally disliked a lot was Step Up Revolution, which tried to add a big political element to a stupid dance film and just failed horribly. But the worst one of all has to be Jim and the Holograms, because this is an insult to the show it's based on, it's an insult to the storytelling, to the actors that are in it, but most of all, it's an insult to the fans, because they took footage of real fans talking about how much they love the television show and their thoughts on that, and they used it as propaganda pieces to make their movie sound better. They added it in the movie to make it sound like they were talking about the band, and it was horribly sung, horribly acted, horribly story, and just the misuse of fan appreciation makes this one of the worst cinema crimes of all time. Let's move on to horror. There's always a lot of bad horror. There's always going to be stuff that just doesn't work. You had a bunch of boring remakes over the last few years, which is like, you had a remake of Carrie, which sucked, a remake of Poltergeist, which was boring. You had a remake of Silent Night, Deadly Night, which they just called Silent Night, and I fell asleep during it. Nightmare on Elm Street, just all horrible remakes. There was the As Above, So Below, where they went searching through the Paris catacombs, and it's like the second they went through a tunnel that was too small for a human to fit through before even any of the scary stuff happening, I'm like, I would have turned around immediately at that point, so no. There was a prequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre called Leatherface, which was super dumb and boring and just, ugh. And you had a character that they were setting up to be Leatherface, and then they killed him and said, no, the pretty boy becomes Leatherface. Like, okay. And then there was The Visit, which was M. Night Shyamalan's comeback into being a popular director. That said, that movie was so slow and boring and just uninteresting, and I knew the twist that was coming for the entire movie, so what's the point? But the worst one for me was Red Riding Hood. Just trying to add a deeper horror element to such a already kind of scary story, but it had bad acting, bad characters. The story was just kind of all over the place, and I don't like the lead in this. I think she is annoying, and she just does not do a good performance here, and I can't stand it. I wanted to do it on my own genre because I didn't want to include this into the action or into the sci-fi thing because there's enough of it that came out this year to be this decade to be considered on its own, and that would be superheroes. More specifically, I wanted to do comic adaptations, things based off comic books of that nature. And we had some really, really bad comic-based stuff. You had Amazing Spider-Man 2, which just horribly ruined everything about Spider-Man. We had Jonah Hex, which while the lead casting was good, everything else story-wise was really bad and just all over the place. We had a remake of an anime called Kite, which was done for America. Just horrible, and not even a great anime, and just made an even worse American adaptation. You had Green Hornet, which may or may not have been a comic first, I'm not sure, but it's still superhero-ish, and just everything Seth Rogen does in that movie makes that movie horrible, because you cut him out, it's an okay film. Him in that makes that film garbage. But the worst one for me was definitely R.I.P.D. So, R.I.P.D. or the Rest in Peace Department had Ryan Reynolds and Jeff Bridges, and Jeff Bridges is the worst performance I've ever seen from him. He literally has one joke, which is, animals defiled my corpse. That's his running joke in the whole movie. And you got Ryan Reynolds, where he's not necessarily Deadpool yet, so he doesn't have the really good comics. He's playing more like he did Green Lantern. So he's not really come into his own entirely yet. He's still in that burgeoning line where he can't decide what kind of person he wants to be. Wait, no. Kevin Bacon is one of the only good things in this movie. He does a decent villain job. The effects are okay-ish, but the story's all over the place. It's just a shitty version of the MIB, and I know R.I.P.D. came out first in the comics, but that's not what they're aping. They're aping Men in Black. So yeah, R.I.P.D., one of the worst. One of the worst romance movies. We had some bad ones. Dear John. Basically, a lot of the Nicholas Sparks ones, but Dear John especially was super annoying and just made no sense whatsoever. You had The Tourist, which was Angelina Jolie and Johnny Depp, who had absolutely no chemistry with each other and just absolutely horrible. We had Lettuce Juliet, which had the same girl that was in Red Riding Hood, so she may be a factor why this one sucks, but it's also boring and really uninteresting. One that I absolutely cannot stand is called Why Did I Get Married 2? It's a fine movie for most of it, but you get to the last 10 minutes, though, and you have Janet Jackson's character arguing with her husband. He gets angry, gets in a car, drives off, gets hit by a truck, is in the hospital, dies. They have a quick lighting of a lantern and sending out into the sky funeral thing, and then literally the next scene is Janet Jackson's character getting hit on and accepting a date with Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. She said something that was mean enough to make him drive off without looking where he was going. Funeral where we don't get to see anyone remotely sad about his passing, and then she's already on the merge to dating someone again at the end of the film. Like, that's supposed to be a happy ending? No. She deserves to be alone. Horrible. That said, the worst romance movie should be fairly obvious. It's the 50 Shades of Grey series. Well, how could they not be? It's the 50 Shades of Grey series. Bad acting, bad story, bad plot, horrible message, teaches everyone the wrong things about the BDSM community, teaches people that it's okay to be an ass as long as you give people money and get them to get over it. So yeah, no, just for the horribleness of 50 Shades of Grey is on there. I recommend watching Dominic Noble's breakdown of the 50 Shades of Grey series. He goes into great detail about it, and it gives you a really good idea of why it's a bad series. Animation-wise, we had a lot of great animated movies this year, but we also had some really horrible stuff. The Emoji Movie, just really bad, horrible choices in that one. Minions was one of the most annoying things I've ever seen, and I really liked Despicable Me 2. I thought that one was a good film, but this was just a horrible follow-up. I cannot stand any of the characters in it. Even though Sandra Bullock gives a good vocal performance in it, the rest of the movie drags it down where I can't even watch it for her. Oh, I hate all three of the Hotel Transylvanias. Nothing in them really works for me. Just uninteresting, not funny. Only thing I like in it is Mabel, and that's because she's cute. Rock Dog. Horrible story, horrible singing, horrible acting. Just one of the worst. But the worst animated film for me had to be Hoodwinked 2. Now, this is a movie that is based off an already kind of bad movie, but at least that one had an interesting concept, which is, let's tell Red Riding Hood's story from everyone's perspective and give you different points of that. But the animation was bad in that one. The animation is worse in this one. The story is all over the place. It makes no sense. The acting is bad. The story, everything in this is just awful. Nothing redeeming in it whatsoever. We move on to sci-fi and fantasy, and there were some definitely really bad ones, of course. We had Pixels with Adam Sandler. Great. We had Lucy, which is a pretty film, but makes absolutely no sense, especially if you know that people already use 100% of their brain. That 10% thing is a myth. You had Transformers 4 and 5, aka Age of Extinction and The Last Night, which are both almost unwatchable films. They're just so awful and terrible. We had sequels to movies that shouldn't have had sequels, such as the third and fourth Universal Soldier movies, which nobody asked for these. Why did we get this? Because, first off, they revived Dolph Lundgren, who got minced into nothingness through a Cornhusker. You had Jean-Claude Van Damme's character becoming the villain of the story and regaining his frozen powers, even though he lost those at a certain point. And just horrible directing, horrible acting, everything in it just does not work. We had Allegiant, which is the third in the Divergent series, where it was okay-ish, and then they changed the ending, and they were like, oh yeah, we're going to leave this open-ended so we have the chance to do a fourth one. It's like, if you've read the books, you know that's where the book should end. Instead, they chose to try to hint at a fourth one, which was never going to get made, because why in the hell would anyone want a fourth one to a book series that only had 3? Especially when there was no reason, since you covered the entire third book in the movie. Stupid. That said, the worst sci-fi fantasy film was Dark Shadows by Tim Burton, starring Johnny Depp, and this one was just all over the place. The only good thing I can say about this one was the effects were actually fairly good, but the story makes no sense. The acting is the most dry Tim Burton movie's ever been. None of the characters have good motivation. Nothing goes on. The eldest daughter of the family is a werewolf for almost the entire movie, but we never find out when she got attacked, why she was going through changes, how this would happen. It just appears. She just randomly becomes a werewolf at the end of the film, and there's no explanation for it. And just, this is the movie that had made me had to admit I don't really like Tim Burton anymore. I don't really like Johnny Depp anymore. These were they have to do stuff to super improve themselves to make me like it. And Tim Burton's kind of doing that. Johnny Depp has yet to do that. I still kind of dislike Johnny Depp because of this film. And finally, we're going to talk about the family pictures. And goodness, we had some bad ones. Let's talk about Last Airbender for starters. Just, bad acting, bad story. This probably would be a lot of people's worst ones, but I think it follows the series okay-ish. I think they just made a lot of really bad choices. It was just a bad idea to have M. Night Shyamalan direct it when he's never done an action series or an adaptation of this style. We had Jackie Chan in The Spy Next Door, which was just The Pacifier, but with Jackie Chan. We had a live-action version of Marmaduke, which nobody asked for ever. You had The Odd Life of Timothy Green, which was like just, let's watch these two people be absolute horrible parents to this plant-based child until he dies, and then let's give them a real baby at the end of the film, because they totally learned their lessons of how not to be shit parents, even though they were shit parents. But the worst kids' family film had to be Pan. Just, ugh. And it doesn't help that, literally, a year before Pan came out, we had a miniseries called Neverland, which wasn't very good, but it was way better than Pan was. You had horrible performances, just musical numbers for no reason. I don't understand why in the world would a group of people be singing Smells Like Teen Spirit that way. It just doesn't work. Hook never becomes Hook. He never becomes the villain. He just is, they just leave that open-ended for sequels. Tiger Lily is played by a white woman. Just bad choices all around. And yeah, that was my top 10 worst films of the 2010s by genre. What do you all think? Is there something you would like me to tell you a little bit more about? Is there other ones that you would put higher? Let me know in the comments below. Happy reading, happy watching, and I'll see you all soon. Bye!